what happened to all those tenants that were not able to pay their rent anymore? Did they end up on the streets as well?
Firstly, our national government announced that any eviction of families from their homes due to non-payment was stopped, and there was a freeze placed on that.
Good Practices, a podcast about municipal response to COVID-19 from Connective cities.
Welcome to this episode of Good Practices, a podcast about municipal response to COVID-19 from Connective cities, the platform for promoting an international exchange of experiences among urban practitioners. My name is Daniela Marzavan. In this podcast, we get to know different practical examples from urban practitioners from all over the world who develop measures to tackle the challenges posed by this pandemic. Co-host by my side is Lardo Stander.
Hello.
She is a journalist from Berlin, and together with the Connective Cities team, she has researched the stories. Hi, Beate.
Hey, Daniela.
So, what are we talking about in today's episode?
Today we look at South Africa, at one of the three capital cities that South Africa has. One of them is Pretoria. And Pretoria is the seat of the executive branch of government, and so it's the administrative capital. And the protagonist for this episode is someone that works in this administration, and it's Lardo Stander.
My name is Lardo Stander. I'm dialing in from the city of Tshwane, which is the capital city of South Africa. I'm working in the administration of the city as an economist in the office of the executive mayor, and we do all kinds of economic analysis and investigation to advise the city on what's happening economically across the world, and what are the best practices internationally, and what typically to expect from the economy, not only in our city but also in our country and in our world over the next 6 to 12 months.
So Lardo Stander is an economist, and he is calculating economical scenarios for the government for the next year. And
Wow, this is like measuring and calculating uncertainty.
yes. And for me, it was very interesting to ask someone like him how he experienced the first lockdown in March.
So we were placed under what we call level 5 of lockdown around the end of March. So initially our country shut down for a 21-day period to essentially enable our health system to prepare and to get ready for the expected influx of patients with COVID symptoms. Subsequent to that, the lockdown of 3 weeks was extended for another 2 weeks, and we actually never left some version of lockdown. So after 5 weeks of initial hard lockdown, so the entire economy shut down, movement of people, goods, everything came to a halt. There were very strict curfews, very strict social distancing measures, and we were allowed to only visit shops and medical facilities for emergencies, and to replenish stocks and perishable goods in our homes.
Okay, so Pretoria has developed this 5-step system that allowed them to bring back the economy whenever the infection numbers were low, right? But I wonder, how did they communicate to all the different groups that live in the city?
Well, they had something that was called the Golden Guidelines, like guidelines to follow the hygiene rules, guidelines for telling the people that they had to stay at home. And these Golden Guidelines were especially important to the many different vulnerable groups in Pretoria.
We have many different vulnerable groups in our societies, and specifically within our cities. So some of these groups include women and children. Some of these groups include, obviously, the homeless individuals. Some of these groups include what we define as indigent households, so households that are really poor and make very little income, and typically earn an income that is under the lower poverty line. And then we also have quite a number of vulnerable groups without access to decent healthcare and typical, what we would take for granted, access to infrastructure like water, electricity, and housing.
So the groups he's speaking about are women and children, homeless people, and very poor people. And when the first COVID-19 cases started in Pretoria, it was very important to work out a plan to protect these groups. And the big problem, especially for the homeless people and the poor people, was that these indigent households, how they call them, were not registered anyway. So one of the first things Lardo Stander and his team were doing was they registered and mapped the households of these poor people so they could apply for municipal help.
We've also extended registration and fast-tracked registration of households onto our indigent register. Once households are on the city's indigent registers, they qualify for free basic delivery of water and electricity. And then we've also expanded significantly on our food bank, where we facilitate the distribution of food parcels for qualifying households. And we've quite recently looked at the introduction of a voucher system to support the purchase of necessities for households that have lost and significantly lost their income during the lockdown measures that we had to implement to fight the COVID pandemic.
I understand that there is a huge problem in mapping out the indigent households. But I wonder what happened to all those tenants that were not able to pay their rent anymore? Did they end up on the streets as well?
No, that was a big problem that Lardo Stander and his team were working on. And sure, a lot of people were having problems paying their rent because they lost their income. Let's hear what the solution to this problem was.
It was a two-pronged approach. Firstly, our national government announced that any eviction of families from their homes due to non-payment was stopped, and there was a freeze placed on that. So landlords could not evict families, firstly. Secondly, as a city, how we responded, we essentially extended a relief program to most of our residents and our businesses, in terms of which we gave them a small tax break and a reprieve or a postponed period for paying their rates and taxes, in order to assist landlords who might not be receiving rent from families that have lost their income, in order for them to also be able to sort of absorb that cash flow loss that they've experienced.
So on the one hand, they prohibited evictions from houses of families who could not afford to pay the rent anymore. And I imagine this was especially the case for people working in the informal sector that were not allowed to go on the streets anymore and pursue their jobs. And on the other hand, they had tax breaks for landlords, because I think this is something we forget very quickly, that the problem is not only that the tenants cannot pay their rent, but if the landlords don't receive that money, then they also have financial problems in providing, for instance, water and electricity to all the other people in the house that maybe pay the rent.
Absolutely. It's a lose-lose situation, I would say. And
but how did the city have all that financial means to pay for all of that? Tax reliefs, and also
yeah, that's true. It's not a lose-lose situation. It's a lose-lose-lose situation. And this is something that affects all the cities in the world. And Lardo Stander and his team saw these big challenges for the city they had to solve.
So obviously with the city giving tax breaks to residents, it also implied that we were collecting less revenue than what we initially estimated and forecasted, and this had a quite severe impact on our current financial year budget. We took the long-term view, however. So based on economic modeling that we did in the city internally, we estimated what the specific economic impact was within our city and what the expected job losses would be in our city. And we quickly realized that it would not be possible for most households and for most residents to keep on paying and keep on contributing to the various service charges and tax regimes within the city, as what they did pre COVID. So mindful of wanting to enable citizens to manage their income and the decrease or loss in income, we quickly responded to make sure that residents know that from the capital city we view this as a partnership. I think one of the most important lessons that we've learned is cities all over the world should have a very strong and very trustworthy social compact with its residents, with its businesses, and with its foreign sector in order for us to tackle these type of challenges and disasters together.
It seems to be like Lardo Stander and his team really appealed to the citizens and to the residents, and it was like a cooperation.
Yes.
So they formed a team. They teamed up and they said, okay, how can we get through this situation together?
In a long-term view, I mean, and I can imagine that even for South African cities, it's not so easy to pay for the future. You know what I mean? I guess
maybe it's important to mention at this point that cities really make a budget at the beginning of the year and need to keep that household. So if all of a sudden all these taxes that you actually planned for are disappearing, this for a city, for financial planning of the city, is a big disaster. Nevertheless, it seems like the citizens, in this case, it seems like the citizens and the municipal actors work together as a team. So how does Pretoria plan for the uncertain future?
That's interesting because they already had an economic recovery plan in September 2020, even if the pandemic was far from being over.
So our economic recovery plan is very much central to our current response. We have already implemented most of those interventions. Some of those interventions, due to time and planning requirements related to them, will only commence in January and February next year. And it's a living document. So whatever lessons we learn in the implementation of some interventions, we embed into the living document so that other interventions can more efficiently and more quickly be implemented throughout our city.
What is a living document, Daniela?
I think it's a clever thing Pretoria did to actually plan for the economic recovery as a response to this economic crisis. So having this open document that can be changed as the crisis evolves helped them to have a feeling of safety and a feeling of being able to plan. And I think they have 45 points, as he mentioned, that they have established as early as September 2020, and they already have designated people and responsibilities for these roles. So in the strategic planning of the economic recovery, this is a really good practice.
It's interesting that Lardo Stander and his team have this future vision. I wonder what he would recommend for other municipalities.
So the main takeaway as well is access to data. I know that it's a challenge in a lot of the developing world that we have independent or standalone data systems, and we actually realize the value of having a consolidated data a repository and nerve center from where you can take quicker and better informed decisions. And then secondly, the social compact that I spoke about, it is critical and vital for cities to have a tangible social compact with its residents and with its stakeholders in order to be able to respond quickly and effectively and appropriately to future pandemics.
So from this episode focusing on economic response and especially housing, the three main takeaways is to have and maintain an accurate data system for municipalities to be able to take informed decisions, to have this strong connection and communication with residents and with other stakeholders, And last but not least, I think it's really inspiring how they plan for the future with this living document about their economic recovery. This was Good Practices, a podcast about municipal response to COVID-19 from Connective Cities. My name is Daniela Marzavan, and I was talking with the radio journalist Beate Stender about Lardo Stander's Good Practice in Pretoria. Producer Beate Stender, executive producer Daniela Marzavan. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you'll be back for our next episode. Stay safe and goodbye.
This podcast was brought to you by Connective Cities, the international community of practice for sustainable urban development, a joint venture between the German Agency for International Cooperation, the Association of German Cities, and Engagement Global Service Agency Communities in One World, commissioned by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development.